Hey, Big John here, and you've picked a great time to listen to Dauphin Island Diaries. There's already a growing library of stories waiting for you. You can listen to all of our previous episodes, and you'll find extended interviews, including a nearly 2 hour conversation with Sherry Pope Moon, whose family story has a very unique connection to Dauphin Island. We're just getting started, and like I said, our catalog is growing. New episodes and interviews will continue to be added week by week, so when this episode ends, don't stop there. Scroll back through the archive and discover a few stories you may have missed. Now, let's get into the show. I am at the Blakeley town site. It's a ghost town with Mike Bunn. And Mike is the director of the Blakeley State Park. He's also the author of a number of books, including, I think, Mike, Alabama textbooks even.
Yeah.
So I don't know when you sleep, because I know how many books you got out there. And doing this, I don't know how you can keep it all going and not stay up 24/7. So, but we are at the town of Blakeley, which is no longer a town. And it was established in 1814. I'll let you talk about a little bit about that history, if you don't mind.
Sure. It was a dream of Mr. Josiah Blakeley. He's from the Northeast. He had been in Mobile immediately prior to this. He'd also lived in Cuba, and lived in other places, and he was sort of an enterprising individual. He noticed that as the Gulf, really the Mobile-Tensaw Delta and the Gulf Coast here came under American control, he was very convinced that there was room for more than one trading city here at the outlet of all these rivers that drain into Mobile Bay. And Mobile was going, and he said, there's a nice dry, high, long bluff over there on the Tensaw. He said, wouldn't it be great if we could found another town? There's plenty of room for more than one. So that was his vision, to create a trading town that would rival Mobile. He never did live to see it develop into its heyday, but he laid the groundwork for that, and he's the one that pushed through and got the Mississippi Territorial Legislature to pass that legislation.
Okay, and it being established in 1813, that would have been actually right as the as Wilkinson came in and took
this. Oh, yeah,
this
it was right after it, yeah.
So,
yeah.
Okay, so, and of course we're, it would have been not too far from here where Kemper came across with his people. I know they were somewhere in the Spanish Fort area, camping out, carousing.
Yeah, a little bit north of here, and then they went over to basically where Saraland is.
Okay.
They got caught by the Spaniards. But yeah, this was an area that was known by people. It's sometimes described, people envision it as just this brand new place, and they looked across the bay. But this is a place people have been traveling and knowing for a long time. Where we're standing, it shows up on 1770s maps as a place where there were colonial era plantations. The Struthers and the Baydon plantation were very near each other, basically on other sides of Bayou Salome, which enters into the Tensaw. And those 1770s maps, particularly the one drawn by David Tate, shows this area as what they call the Appalachia's Old Field. So there was an Appalachian Indian village here, which is why we've got a reconstruction of Appalachia House. So this is an area that people knew about this bluff. They knew about the sources of fresh water, but Blakeley was the first one to really try to develop an American town.
Okay, that's interesting. And in its heyday, it actually did rival Mobile for importance and size, and that would have been when?
So Blakeley was founded in 1814. You begin to sell lots a year or two after that, and it really sort of reaches its height of being a going urban entity in the early 1820s. So that's when it's really showing the most promise. You've finally got people moving here. They're buying the lots, they're building homes. You've got a newspaper that's established here that was being printed. Some of the first steamboats in the state of Alabama were being built here. You've got a variety of other commercial enterprises. At one point, you had nearly 24 commercial establishments, dry goods stores and hardware stores, etc. So that's all in the early 1820s when it looks like this place is about to really blow up, and it was already sort of rivaling Mobile in some ways. Now, the population was going pretty well, but it was not quite to where Mobile was. The commercial traffic is what Mobile was concerned about. But it never got to the point that it made a huge dent in Mobile's commercial traffic, but they could see that if they did not do something, it was. So they really got aggressive, Mobile did, about improving their harbor then, doing all kinds of things to improve access to the harbor. Blakeley was actually a port of entry at one point, had its own port warden. So all these things are happening in the early, mid-1820s. And of course, the story is, we'll talk about in the future, I'm sure, but that the story is that it could not maintain that pace and eventually became a ghost town. But for a while, in the 1820s, it was a serious rival. It shows up even on the first state seal of Alabama as one of the major population centers in the entire state.
Okay, that's interesting. And of course, at that point, because Alabama's becoming a state in 1819, so what you're talking about is it's heading upward at the point when Alabama's becoming a state. And so going back even before that, and I may be misspeaking here, and this is the reason why I get experts to ask questions of them, but I know one of the things that was going on, before the whole West Florida thing, before Wilkinson, his expedition, and all of that, when we're talking about late 1700s, early 1800s, one of the things that's going on is the people that are moving into what was then the old Southwest Territory. They come down the Federal Road, they're headed over into the Fort Stoddart area, and when they want to send trade, the things they're producing, they want to ship them, they've got to go through Mobile. The Spanish are charging some pretty high taxes on those things, and they're doing that on everything that comes through, and it's not necessarily based on what the actual value is. It's based on what they value at what they assess it at. So in some cases they're overtaxing things, so people are trying to figure out ways to run around. Was this one of those areas where
this was one of the areas that they attempted to run around? Of course, they couldn't. The Spanish were watching, but they were trying to find ways to get things into Mobile Bay, to get it to international ports, rather than pay those onerous duties that the Spanish were charging. Now, at times, Spain would relent, and there'd be windows of time when there was no charge. That was what the Americans understood the agreement was supposed to be, that there was free navigation for both sides, but they would periodically just enforce them. They even the supplies that came in by boat to go to help supply the troops up at Fort Stoddart, which at this point was just inside the American border,
right, just above
had
the
to come
line.
from Mobile, and at times they were even holding that and forcing the United States government to pay something, which obviously didn't sit well. So this was an area of intrigue for quite a while before it became part of the United States. And that's just one of the many stories that help you understand this is sort of a contested borderland for a while, which is an interesting backdrop for a city to take shape in.
Right. Well, and then the next question along those same lines, one of the things I've been finding in my research is that, oh, by the way, there was a considerable portion of the Gulf area that was supposed to have been included as part of the Louisiana Purchase, according to the United States. Spain said no. And would this have been part of that, or would it have still been really well into Spanish territory?
No, it would have involved this area, and that's sort of a claim that got made a little bit after it. So it's not necessarily at the time the Americans really pushed to have this included. But upon reflection, they looked back at the documents and said because the purchase referenced that it would include all of what the French had regarded as the colony of Louisiana. And so they looked back and realized that they're trying to get Mobile anyway. And they said, you know what, the French recognized the border between their colony of Louisiana and Florida as the Perdido River, which
Right.
is the modern boundary between Alabama and Florida,
Right.
Pensacola and Mobile. So they picked up on that and said, really, we should already have this.
Right.
And that became a point that presidential administrations made, that other people insisted on. And it was one of the several arguments that ended up taking place of why this should be American territory. And ultimately, the United States just took it. But before that, they were pressuring Spain. They even came down and they threatened a military activity, and then they talked with the governor here, the commandant, and said, you're outnumbered. If we wanted to take it, we could. We'll make this great deal with you, where you will hand over the territory. We'll even pay for everything needed for your guys to move out of here. We'll let you take your supplies. So they just were pushing constantly, and they thought that at any given point, word was going to arrive from a Spanish official said this is no longer worth it. But it just never really did.
Right.
They kept trying to hold on to it, but the United States, for many years prior to the War of 1812, really thought they were on the verge of taking it.
Well, from the standpoint, and by the way, for our listeners, this was being, from a Spanish standpoint, administered from Havana. And so for them, it was a cash cow. Why would you give a cash cow away?
Well, it was not only that it had some monetary value in terms of what it could generate, it controlled access to those riverways. So it's an important strategic location, even beyond any monetary generation. And it also served as a buffer to protect other holdings in the region. If you let the United States have the entire Gulf Coast, you've got no protection, no infrastructure that's going to slow down that westward expansion to their more valuable properties in Mexico and the western United States, where mining and other things are going on. So Spain viewed it as a strategic buffer and a potential source of income, and you put all that together, and they were very loath to surrender it to the United States.
And for our listeners who may be interested in, of course, this is being done for Dauphin Island Diaries, but our sister podcast, The Tennessee History Nerd, the episode that dropped yesterday, which is the first episode in June of 2026, the second episode of June of 2026. It is about the state of Franklin, and the state of Franklin actually had begun, or John Sevier, as governor of the state of Franklin, had begun doing some negotiations with Spain, and it was about that same thing that Mike just mentioned. They were Spain from their perspective was looking at Franklin as potentially being a buffer against some of that westward expansion, to slow down some of the settlers coming across the Appalachians and moving into this area. Of course, probably would have actually accelerated it, but that's not what they were thinking at that point. So talking then about Blakeley itself, I mean, we talked about some of the background. And when I look back over here to the side of where we are, there are some logs lying over here in this area. What are those logs?
Well, what you're looking at right there is the remains of a tree, a historic tree that we call the jury oak. So that is allegedly one of the places that the Baldwin County courts functioned prior to there actually being a courthouse. Now, Blakeley was the county seat. There were a lot of live oaks and shady spots to hold court. Is that necessarily exactly where Judge Harry Tillman held court? I can't really say that, but what I can say is that since the park's opening in 1981 and the original administrator, Mary Grice, that has been one of the stories that she told on tours, and it's become so ingrained in legend that we carry on that tradition, but we put it as sort of legends and lore about Blakeley, because I can't document it, but I can document that there's enough grains of truth there that if it wasn't that specific tree, it was certainly somewhere in the area. And so we like to use that one as sort of a local landmark that helps you connect with a story.
Okay, and that's interesting. And then, of course, where we're standing right now, where we've parked, is across from where the courthouse itself was. There's the foundation there that's been excavated. You now have a structure over it to protect it. You got bars around it to keep people from going in and damaging it or taking souvenirs. When would that have been built?
That was built in the late 1820s, about 1830. It was this functioned as the county seat for a few years before that. So we don't have a really good documentation of what was going on in those periodic court sessions. There's an assumption that they just kind of met wherever they needed to, but there were a lot of buildings in Blakeley at the time, so we don't know. Maybe court was some ad hoc sessions were held in a hardware store. We just don't know all the details of that, but they knew they needed an official permanent county seat. They eventually got this thing built, and it was a 2-story structure with a courthouse and a jail. And what we've done back in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was some grant money that came available to fully excavate that foundation, herringbone pattern brick, and you can see the incomplete outline, and then a structure was erected over it to protect it. And so that's what you're looking at. But it is the first courthouse that was built here, but there were sessions of court held here prior to that.
Okay, and so just to be clear, because I've had comments placed out on my Facebook page that was built after the town died, the courthouse. No, the structure over it was built much later, but the courthouse itself was here when there was a town here. That wouldn't have made sense to put a courthouse
exactly
there. But when I saw that, it was like, I'm not going to say anything until I talk to Mike. But I'm talking to Mike real soon, so we'll go through that. And then to that point, you've got the courthouse over here. Well, if you've got a case being tried in that court and there's a capital crime, and there is a conviction, what happens then?
Well, in cases where the punishment for a murder was hanging, it would have taken place somewhere nearby. And so, of course, I know where you're going. We've got another oak that is rumored to have been the hanging oak, the hanging trees, where those murder convictions would have been carried out by hanging. Again, it's the same thing. It's what's recognized on that Legends and Lore panel, is that I cannot, with 100% accuracy, go to it and tell you, I know for sure a hanging took place, but this is part of the story that the original founder helped make come alive for people, and found a very prominent tree that fit the bill, and it's become a landmark. And although I can't, as I said, I'm a historian. I want to take you to the spot and verify it on paper. And no, I can't do that with this. But what I can verify is that things like that took place, and this has become a great touchstone that connects people with that story. So there's a grain of truth. It's a plausible scenario. We explain it as that, but it helps you visualize something.
Okay.
And so that's its importance to me.
Okay. Well, and I appreciate, one of the things, I don't know how much you've seen what I'm doing, but I do really, I don't consider myself an historian, but accuracy matters. Yeah. And if I'm inaccurate, I want to know about it. And if it's not something I can say, I know this to be the truth, it's rumored, I'll say it's legend, I'll say it's, but I can't confirm it 100%.
Legend is a part of understanding local history. So I'm fine with us having some legends and some folklore surrounding Blakeley, as long as it's based in some truth, and we can tell you what we know, and we can take you to something, help you visualize something, sort of like we built these ghost structures. They did not literally stand on these spots, but it helps you understand. They were informed by a lot of cumulative knowledge about what things look like, and we want to use those as just to help you reference it so it comes alive in your mind's eye. Okay. And these legends help you do that.
If you enjoy the stories we tell each week and would like to show your support, I'd like to invite you to check out the Summers Media Enterprises merchandise store. You'll find shirts, hats, mugs, stickers, and other items featuring both the Tennessee History Nerd and Dauphin Island Diaries. This month's featured item is one of my personal favorites, our I Break for Historical Markers bumper stickers. Whether you're the kind of person who can't drive past a historical marker without pulling over, or you simply appreciate a good piece of history, it's a fun way to let everyone know you're always on the lookout for the next great story. To browse the entire collection, just visit the link in the show notes or visit the Summers Media Enterprises website. Every purchase helps to support the work that goes into researching, producing, and sharing these stories each week. Thanks for listening. Thanks for supporting our podcasts. And now let's get back into the story. Let's walk through some of that a little bit. And until you just now said what you said, I thought that these were on the footprint of where these places were located. So that's
No,
not the case.
Not necessarily. We don't on this bluff, there's been several eras of human occupation. There's been a lot of disturbance, and if you look at any given section of land, you're going to find things like Native American pottery will be sitting in soil 2 inches above a Civil War bullet. So things have been churned up, and so it's difficult to get a really clean footprint of a building the way we would like to. But what we did have is a lot of information from the newspapers and other sources about some of the businesses that were here. And we wanted to develop something to help school groups especially, but visitors of all ages, understand the physical reality of an urban entity in the early 1800s, because it's a ghost town, nothing's left. So we built things to the size and the scale based on what we know from here and other nearby well-documented structures to help you understand the physical reality of what it would have been like to walk into a block of commercial buildings. So we placed them in a location that really facilitated easy touring by groups, which is right near the road. We've got a big loop trail that we can take. So we don't claim that they are in the footprint, but we claim that they are very close to the size, the scale, the mass, the height, the width of known structures of the time period.
Okay, and these names that you have on the fronts of these ghost structures here,
those are actual store names. Yeah. Those are business entities. Sturtevant, Trout and Gurney, Peters and Stebbins, James L. Seabury. All these are known businesses that operated in Blakeley, late 18 teens, early 1820s, documented and placed ads in the newspaper and all that. So we pulled out a few that were representative things that were going on here, and wanted to kind of establish a commercial block. And that's what we've done with these three adjoining buildings.
Okay. Now, you'd mentioned that Blakeley was not only a port, but they were manufacturing steamboats.
Yeah.
Where, I mean, obviously that's going to be down closer to the river, but where would that have been? Would it have been this way? Would it have been that way? Or
down closer to our dock where our boat leaves from, at the Blakeley dock, just to the left of that, we've got a big open space. All the information we have is that is literally the location where some of that construction took place. I would like to know more about how they actually launch these things, because boats typically have some sort of ways that you're going to launch it into. So it'd be neat to know, how were they built, or were they built literally on the water and they let it slide down the way? Was it a ramp that was a little bit further inland? I don't know the specifics, but I do know that's where they built them. And so that's a really interesting connection when you think about the incredible importance steamboats played in Alabama's economy. Suddenly you go to anywhere you're near a river, anywhere in the state, if you can get your crop to a river port, you can get it to international markets. And think that Blakeley played one small role in the beginning that mechanical revolution, which just totally changed everything in Alabama. Incredibly energized the economy, also sadly facilitated the exponential rise in slavery and cotton plantations. But good, bad, and different. That's a very important statewide and region-wide story that we have to tell.
And then how, I think about Mobile. Mobile has the waterfront. I mean, it's you walk down the hill, it's there, and you're right on the water. And really, the city of Mobile expanded from the water inland rather than the other way around. We're probably several hundred yards from the dock from where we are right now.
Yeah, from our dock, but if you went, we've got a trail that goes right this direction. In between some of the trees out in the distance, even though it's summer, I can still see a little bit of the river, so you're only like 200 yards.
And that was here. That's why I was asking, because I wasn't really sure if I was seeing river or if I was seeing.
You are.
Okay.
So there's a street here. There'll be a street on the other side of that pavilion. There'll be one more street actually closer to the river. And so this entire bluff, this entire riverfront was the heart of the town, and it expanded out from that. And basically, if you're in the park, you're probably encountering some of those original roads. All the way out to our entrance at 225 was part of the road system that connected you on to places like Pensacola and further north to Stockton, but the lots that were sold, this would have been the commercial heart, but just like any urban entity, you got commercial heart, and then you've got extending out for maybe a mile further, and the other directions would have been your residential lots.
And then when we go back and wind around, and I don't know as the crow flies how far we are and how it would have been from the standpoint of in that day, but I know, of course, haven't even gotten to the Civil War and the big battle that took place here yet, but kind of almost across from where Redoubt number 6 is where there was a cemetery.
Town cemetery, and we're actually having that ground penetrating radar study is going on right now to document how many more burials, because we know there are multiple more burials than we have stones. And the interesting part about it, and it's funny you mentioned that because I'm literally talking with the person doing the research today, is that cemetery you can see from the main park road, which definitely is in the footprint of the old Pensacola Road, no doubt. So you're going down an existing road and getting to the old town site. That shows up on maps even during the Civil War. But what's really interesting is that cemetery from that main road, the heart of it is across a field a good 150, 200 yards away. It's almost like it's oriented facing another old town road. And when you look at the GPR and the LiDAR studies, it does look like there's another road that branched around on either side of that, that we've sort of lost a lot of traces of that. But it just helps you understand that when you talk about a town and you come here and you see this one street, there are many more streets and byways and highways all in the area, and as far away as that, which is a mile away, you're basically talking about getting to the outskirts of the town of Blakeley.
And so how many, at its height, what would have been roughly the population of?
Great question that I do not have a definitive answer to. I can tell you there's a lot of people that have it wrong in history books, because there's some people that'll say, oh, Blakeley had 5,000 residents. Well, Mobile didn't even have that. So it definitely didn't have that. My personal estimation from everything that I know from the time period and every document I've ever seen and just knowing what's in the area is I think at its height it was probably a town of maybe 1,500 to 2,000 people. At the time that Mobile would have been a little bit more than that. So it was definitely a center of urban development, and 1,500 to 2,000 doesn't sound huge, except when you put it into context and you realize there's nothing else in the entire Mississippi territory outside of Natchez that would have had a population like that that's an American settlement. So it's definitely one of the larger ones, but as far as putting a specific number, I'm unable to do it, but I think it's lower than some of these estimates in the history books from the 20s.
So as we walk on around through here, what would these particular businesses that we're walking by here that you've got represented may have been close to here, may not have been, but they were in the town. What were they? What did they do?
Dry goods, grocers, hardware, supplies of all times, ranging from guns to clothing to bushels of corn and all the things that you would need to make a living in this sort of area and be traded, tools, axes, hoes, all the things that you would expect to find in any sort of general dry goods store. That's what they're engaged in business selling.
Okay, and would the 1820s have been its height, or would it have continued growing on into the 30s, 40s, 50s?
Right around 1830 is when you get to a point that it really starts to have a pivot point where it does begin to a slow decrease.
Okay.
So the commercial activity was sort of at its height around 1825.
Okay.
Within a few years, you've got some of the things that lead to the slow demise of the town beginning to happen. Episodes of yellow fever, Mobile getting serious about improving their port and not allowing some of the cotton and lumber that's coming to Blakeley to be shipped out of their port. You put all that together, and by 1832, 33, you got a drastically different place that suddenly, instead of ascending, it's stagnant or descending. And by 1840, the whole thing was gone. Even the port warden, his office was removed in the early 1830s and sent over to Mobile. So it happened relatively quickly.
Yes, it did.
Yeah.
And then, evidently there was still some degree of strategic importance, because when you get into the 1860s, you've got a fort here.
Exactly, and the Fort Blakeley was, of course, not built to defend the community. So it's called Blakeley because of the location, not because it's defending a place. What it's defending is access to the Tensaw River.
Okay.
So the federal forces at that time were targeting Mobile. They'd wanted to do that since 1862 for various reasons. They had been delayed. But when they finally put together the forces to come and try to capture Mobile, the commanding officer was given the option of, do you want to go directly into Mobile, face all those fortifications and capture it immediately, or do you want to find a way to bypass it, go into central Alabama where Selma, which was a much more strategic target, Selma was still manufacturing probably about half of the ammo that the Confederacy was still firing. And he said, no, I'm not going to attempt to go into interior Alabama and leave all this behind me. I'm going to go ahead and attack it head on. Well, the Confederates, since the Battle of Mobile Bay was August of 1864, that's when they began construction of this and Spanish Fort. They wanted to make sure there was no option that you could not bypass Mobile. They wanted to make sure that any federal invading force would have to deal with these and could not get up the river. So this was built to protect the back door to Mobile and also to protect that strategic route into interior Alabama. And when they did it, it's a 3-mile-long series of earthworks. So it's not around one place. It's not one square bastion. It's not in necessarily the old town of Blakeley, but the old town of Blakeley sits on this bluff, and that's that strategic spot. And so it's on a big arc that touches on the river on the north and south.
So by that time, how big was Blakeley?
By that time, Blakeley was no longer a functioning town. There were certainly people in the area on farms. Even the maps show places like cornfields and things like that. So it was still a small community. Some of the buildings were still here. We know that the Confederate Marines utilized them for storing supplies, and other things that involved the logistics of the operation maintaining Blakeley, but it was no longer a functioning community. So it's hard to say exactly because there's really no census information, but this thing would have been a small collection of homesteads around what at one time was an urban entity. So
when did it cease to be really a functioning town?
That's another question I would love to be able to specifically pinpoint. I always use the year 1840 because you just don't see as much activity, commercial activity. If you look at the records, it's almost like everything was almost completely gone by 1840, but you don't have that definitive date where they closed up the doors and said Blakeley's done. But you definitely can see that it's on its way out as a community, as a functioning town by the mid-1830s. And when you see people arriving in the area by 1840, you hear about stories about how some structures that were being built and some of the first settlers that are coming into the region were basically coming to the old town site and taking some of the brick foundations and
some
wood.
spolios going on.
Yeah, there's some repurposing of these buildings, and so you put all that together, and obviously you're not going to do that if it's a functioning community.
Right, yeah, people aren't going to let you steal part of their house that they're actually using.
Exactly, so it's sort of anecdotal evidence that helps inform us, but about 1840 is when you Blakeley is pretty much done. Okay.
Well, now, at what point did it stop being the county seat?
That wasn't until after Civil War. So 1868 is when it continued to be the county seat, which meant that basically sessions of court, which could be held, quarterly or something like that, you could still gather and hold it. There were still functioning docks. You could get people here by boat. There were still roads that came through. So it was not this overgrown, out-of-the-way, washed-up place. There were still things happening. There were still a few people here. There was still the infrastructure and the buildings, the courthouse. And most of the time, the people who were doing all that weren't there working every day, day-to-day.
So it was an administrative center, and that's about it. It's not a commercial center, and certainly at this point sounds like the steamboat manufacturing probably is already gone.
Oh, yeah. That had been gone in the early 1820s.
Okay. So then I think if I remember correctly, it's 1866, 1868 that the county seat gets moved from here down to what is now Daphne. It wasn't really incorporated then. It wasn't incorporated, if I'm correct, until the 1920s. And that's an interesting story about how it gets from there to Bay Minette also.
Yeah, basically stole the records.
You're right.
They wanted it up in Bay Minette, and they came and stole all the records in the middle of the night and took it up to Bay Minette, and suddenly it's the county seat. So that's a different story, but it is an interesting local story.
Yeah, yeah. If you enjoy the way we tell stories here on Dauphin Island Diaries, there's another show you might want to check out, The Tennessee History Nerd. Same approach, different setting. Stories from across the volunteer state, rooted in place and built from the sources up. You can find it wherever you're listening right now. And now, let's get back to our story. So then when we get into what really was, I'll call it the last nail in the coffin, what was that?
As far as the town? Yeah, the last nail in the coffin was when you removed the port warden, it's no longer a place to bring goods or in or out, and you don't have a really good system for exchange, then that's its last piece of business. You know, the dry goods stores can move, everything else can go, but the port can still function without a lot of that stuff. But when the business got to the point that there wasn't enough to maintain somebody to document and collect taxes and do all this stuff, you can see that was it. They were all choosing to go over to Mobile at that point.
Okay. And at what point would the big yellow fever epidemic that really gutted it have been?
Well, there's more than one.
Okay.
There were at least 3 that were documented to take place between the 18 teens and I think it's 1828 or so is the last big one. So, but I always tell people when we talk about that, Mobile was affected by yellow fever too. So yellow fever is not purely the blame. You have to look at the rest of the story. And in Mobile, you've got a community where you've got a lot of people who had deep roots there, and they may leave town and they might come back during the yellow fever epidemic. A lot of the people who were settling here, were particularly a large group of them, were from the Northeast, and they moved down here right as this area opened up. Well, what do you do when there's a yellow fever scare and they say, if you stick around, you're going to get sick and die?
You go home.
Pick up, you move, you go somewhere else, and you may not come back because the Mississippi Territory is a huge area, a lot of new developing settlements, a lot of riverfront towns.
A lot of opportunity.
And that's basically what happened. You've got this every time it hit, you get a few people leaving, a few more leaving, and they're not coming back.
Right. Well, I know, kind of tying to your... you were talking about the Battle of Mobile Bay in August of 1864. The guy who is the Union commander in that, David Farragut, was born in East Tennessee, born in just outside of Knoxville. His father had been Spanish. Actually came and became an American citizen, fought for the American. Even though Spain fought on the side of the United States, of course, I think maybe wrote a book about that. He takes a job as, with the port in New Orleans, and they move down to the coast. Farragut's mom dies in Pascagoula in a yellow fever epidemic. He ends up being more or less adopted by David Porter, and that launches his naval career. He's a midshipman at 10 years old.
Yeah.
And spends his life in the Navy, but it's actually tied to this area, not too far from here anyway, and to the very thing we were talking about with this. But exactly what you're mentioning, you've got opportunity. They left Knoxville to go to New Orleans as this is opening up in the early 1800s, like 18, late 18, not quite to the 18 teens yet, more than likely. I'd have to go back and look at my notes to remember exactly when that was. But it's by the War of 1812, he's already adopted and is with Porter serving as a midshipman in the U.S. Navy. So but this area, basically it was a boomtown, in other words.
Yeah. Yeah, it
I
was a
mean,
boomtown for a brief period of time. It was a good representative of what was taking place on what we call Alabama, which at one point would have been an epicenter of Western migration on the frontier of what we would have. We recognize the Deep South. They would have at the time saw it as the nation's southwestern frontier.
correct. Yeah, and for our listeners, this area, and we're not too far from really where that would have been called the Old Southwest. It's a little west of here, but you're what? How far are we from where Fort Stoddart would have been?
Oh, we're probably about 35, 40 miles at most. Yeah.
And that was the original terminus
Of the Federal
of
Road.
the Federal Road coming down through Creek territory.
Yeah.
So from Milledgeville, Georgia, across, and if I remember correctly from your book, it followed, give or take, from Montgomery to here, essentially basically the same route that 65 follows today.
Yeah. I-65 follows that route, and that was a route that was not arbitrary. It was because it actually follows a little ridge that you got some relatively high ground. You can't appreciate it from 65, but if you're traveling by foot, you've got watersheds on either side of this, and that's what the old Indian trails and the trading paths followed. They wanted to avoid making these stream crossings and going through swamps, etc. And so those trails end up following some of these trading paths, and that really, you go back even further, some of these are old animal trails,
Sure.
bison and all these things. So when you're on those trail systems, it's not an arbitrary place through the woods. These are things that have been developed over centuries.
Right. Well, the Indians, to not being idiots themselves, realize that the animals already know the best way to get through. So they follow that trail, and then the whites come along, and they follow the trail that the Indians did.
Yeah.
And so when the Federal Road was being built, it starts off as a post road. It's basically 4 feet wide, assuming that it's maintained. In a lot of places it wasn't. By the time we're getting on up to the time period approaching the War of 1812, the United States is realizing, hey, we've got to be able to administer this vast new territory that Jefferson's gotten for us. And it's kind of the Indians, the Creeks, are the main tribe in the area. They're realizing, you got to watch the U.S. government. They'll tell you they want 4 feet, and the next thing you know, they want 4 times that, because here comes a 16-foot wide widening of it, so they can get wagons through to be able to. And the thing is, when it's a post road, it's hard to be used by settlers. But when it's 16 feet wide for the wagons to get through for the U.S. Army, the same thing can be used for settlers coming through with their own wagons.
They did. It became an immigration superhighway, as I like to describe it. It became the primary route. So you're following along a lot of what's the interstate today, 85 and 65, and that's the way they would have looked at it at the time. It's the major land artery connecting areas of the country, and there was a group of a large amount of traffic that they would have seen as just as congested. Like, they could not imagine how many people were pouring into their territory. The Creeks couldn't on that new highway.
Okay, and so how did that inform the development of Blakeley?
Well, in the big picture, what it did was it brought a lot of American settlers to the area just to the north. And of course, as we discussed earlier, they wanted trade, they want international markets for their productions and get things out throughout the world by boat. And how do you do that? You go through the port of Mobile and the lower ends of these riverways, you get into Mobile Bay and you go on. So when Blakeley's founded, to take advantage of all that, you already have some pent-up demand just to the north. And so you've got, you're in an area that has already had a lot of the development that kind of sets the stage for it to be a prosperous trading town.
If you're a business with a strong connection to history, education, travel, or place-based storytelling, and you're looking to reach an audience that values those things, we should talk. You can reach me at john.summers@summersmediaenterprises.com. Now, let's get back to our story. did the Ellicott line come all the way across over here?
Well, the Ellicott line is, of course, to our north, 31st parallel.
Okay.
So, it cut all the way from the Mississippi River all the way over to the Chattahoochee. In this area, it would have gone through Mobile and Baldwin counties. Where it goes through the Delta, which is directly north of here, Ellicott had some ingenious methods for doing that. He was not able to get out and walk through all the swamps and the rivers, but he would wait for clear days with little wind, and they would set fires in line, and they could see the smoke rising, and he could trace through all his complicated workings on figuring out where he was with latitude based on some of that. So he got an interesting way to get through the Delta, but once you get on the other side of the Tensaw, Baldwin County, he continued on. He actually put some mounds in place to help mark the place. The one thing that's left in this area that is most associated with that survey is, of course, the stone that he left in North Mobile County. There's an Ellicott stone. It's literally placed, stone marker, placed by him during that survey, and on one side it says property of the United States, and the other side is property of King of Spain. So you can go to the exact spot and connect with that story and actually where they were on that survey. And the amazing thing is he did that in, 1799 to 1800, and he's only a few hundred feet off. With modern equipment, it's amazing how close he was to being dead on.
And so, but we are definitely south of that line.
Oh yeah, we're south of the line.
And that's where I was looking at. So that pent-up demand, they still couldn't have gotten here because we're down below that.
Yeah, we're in Spanish territory before that. Yeah, so this officially became part of the United States after 1813 when we acquired it from Spain. And so this immediately was annexed into the Mississippi Territory. The Mississippi Territory government before that had even designated some officials that were supposed to do certain governmental roles in Mobile, even though Spain still held Mobile. So they had appointed officials, even though they really couldn't exercise any jurisdiction, because that's how much confidence they had. Spain was either going to relinquish it or they were going to take it. So they had not done that necessarily on the other side of the bay, which is where we're at, but clearly they had plans that this was going to be United States property soon. A lot of pressure applied.
And that was, I think, probably a big part of the reason you had people like Toolman, who, when you've got loose cannons like Kemper running around, are trying to keep those guys from messing everything up, mucking around, trying to add it on to West Florida, and they're like, no, we're not going to get a lot of Spanish troops in here where we've got a harder job when we're ready to do what we want to do.
Yeah. Toolman was all about law and order and following procedure, and he, like everybody else, assumed there would be a time that this came into United States possession. Why mess things up? And you're only going to slow down that process by just purposely infuriating the Spaniards and acting like you're going to form a rebellion. Because what happened over in Louisiana at Baton Rouge, they talked as if they would do the same thing here, and it really was a bunch of blowhards, and they got together and they drank and they talked and they pretended they were doing something. They never made any organized attempt except to get together and camp and talk. But Spain had enough of it, and they sent an expedition up the river from Mobile and actually captured these guys, had a little firefight in the middle of the night, shot some of them, captured some of them, sent them over to Morro Castle in Havana. So they put an end to it, but they did that because American officials were cooperating on the intelligence of it. So it's an odd situation. It's an area that the United States wants, but yet they're working technically to maintain Spanish sovereignty because they thought that was the best path forward. You didn't need a revolution and a revolt to capture Mobile. If you played your cards right, maybe they give you the thing outright.
Okay. And so that all goes down in 1813. 1814, they're here.
Oh, yeah.
What was the strategic importance to the United States of Blakeley at that point?
Well, again, you talk about context. So you've got now another trading hub on the opposite side of the Delta. It's not only on that strategic spot on the river where you've got this bluff and this landing, so it gives you access, greater access to the river system. But remember, the roads that come through here, this was a terminus of of some stage roads. You got a road that goes to Pensacola. It's the very road that Andrew Jackson traveled in when he went to become the governor of the Florida Territory. And you've also got a road that goes north to Stockton, which really ultimately connects with the federal road. So this is a land transportation hub as well. So when you've got land and water routes that connect here, it becomes a very strategic spot for a lot of reasons, just regional travel, and of course economics. And there was actually a ferry that was established that ran, the Emmeline was its name, and it ran between Blakeley and Mobile regularly in the late 1800s, early 1820s. I can't say the exact date that it stopped running, but it ran for a period of time that connected these communities. So travelers, you might end your stage travel here, and you get on the ferry and go to Mobile to continue whatever your journeys are. So that was happening and connecting these areas. So it kind of shows that this area was becoming interconnected. Mobile and the Eastern Shore have this long history that goes back much longer than people even realize of being an interconnected community.
All right, so what I'm going to do now is probably something that's going to make you cringe.
Uh-oh.
I'm going to play a little alternative history game here just for a second. Let's assume just for a moment that by the 1840s, instead of this having essentially died out, it's grown. How does that change the history of the area?
That's a good question. I think that it would have hastened the development of the area, because after it's gone, you really never have another major community on the Tensaw River, even today. We still don't. But you've got an influx of people that are coming here now, but that was a slow developing thing. You know, Baldwin County did not grow very fast until you get into the 1900s. I do wonder if it would have helped spur that a little earlier, at least in this one area. It might have been developed quicker, earlier. It might have changed a little bit about the strategic plans in the Civil War even, because you would have had a major community, and that maybe Fort Blakeley might have been in the same place, but the town of Blakeley might have been more of a target at that point if had that been allowed to grow like that. So it's all kinds of interesting games you can play with that and think about how it would have changed history. But to have a thriving commercial port, had it not taken the turn it did and had it continued to grow, would have been a really interesting dynamic to have major communities on either side of the bay.
Knowing how the population growth has been in the area from the, I'll say, late mid 20th century onward. Of course, it was, Mobile was a huge area of development around with the World War II effort producing shipping. And you look at urban sprawl, the way it happens nowadays. Think Atlanta, think, any major city. I mean, you would be easily where you could potentially have a Blakeley, Mobile, Twin City kind of urban area if that had happened. What does that look like to the Mobile Bay?
That's a good question. Right now, where we're at today, we've got that one maintained shipping channel that goes up to Mobile. Pretty big endeavor, and it employs a lot of people, and there's a lot that has to go into maintaining a 45-foot deep shipping channel in a bay that's usually about 7 or 8 feet deep. It's not all that deep. I do wonder, had Blakeley taken off, what would have been the impact? Would it have slowed down anything Mobile, or would it have sped up things at Blakeley? Who knows? But I could easily see a point in time, if Blakeley had continued to grow, where maybe it never gets to be the shipyards that Mobile is, but I could see that there might be a reason to maintain some commercial route for shipping, that if it didn't connect its own route all the way to Mobile Point, maybe there was a connection across the bay to connect with Mobile.
Okay.
I could see something like that have been necessary if it continued its growth.
Right. Well, I know when you say alternative history, normally a real historian goes, ooh. No.
Well, I enjoy thinking about those things.
Right. Well, and it is fun to think about it the big thing is when you start saying definitively this would have happened and this would have happened. You can't say that because you have no idea what other variables would have come into play as well.
Right.
So
That's right.
we've walked around the area. We're what now, about 50, 60 yards from the quote hanging tree. I'm going to put that in quotes.
Yeah.
What have I not asked you that I should have asked you about Blakeley?
Well, the thing that I wish I could do a better job of, that's most intriguing to me, is explaining daily life. We don't have a lot of really good records about. I don't have a lot of letters, and I've got a newspaper. I've got some accounts, some official accounts of shipping and military stuff, but I wish I could do better at telling people what their day-to-day existence was like. What's it like to live in these small homes? What did they trade for? What did they eat? We've tried to establish a little bit of that sort of interpretation in the park with doing some living history that focuses on foodways, so people preparing foods of the time period. But just to get a feel of how people lived is something that I find personally intriguing. A lot of groups will ask me. So I tell them what I know of the time period. I wish I had more to tell you. Right here, this was happening. So when we talk about that, we're having to pull together a lot that we know in the Southeast in general. That's the one thing that I was going to
say about the closest thing you can do is say city life in 1825. Look at what it was like in Mobile,
exactly,
and infer that it would have been similar here, which probably is true.
Probably, but there's going to be some variables.
Yeah,
there's definitely would be some variables. And right here, you've got Blakeley had abundant supplies of fresh water, which is something that Mobile did not have quite as much of. You've got people from a different area overall. I mean, it's not like they're drastically different, but you've got a concentration of people arriving here from the Northeast with specific, lifestyles, architectural styles, religious viewpoints, etc. So I'd be really interested to know more about how they viewed themselves and what they were establishing versus what was across the bay. There had to be a little bit of rivalry and difference, between those two communities. And I just don't have a lot of documentation, but you put it all together and you can infer that they probably would have seen themselves as establishing a little bit of a different sort of community than what was over in Mobile, which was founded by the French and had gone through British and Spanish rule, and it was viewed as sort of a northernmost point in the Caribbean as much as it's a southernmost point in the United States.
Right.
So you think about Blakeley, this is a brand new 100% American town that some of its leading players are from the Northeast. We're talking guys with Puritan background, so would have been a little bit of a different social dynamic.
And a very different, so you go to Boston, you go to Providence, you go to any place in the New England seaboard up there, and the way they do things, build things, conduct their daily business, quite different from the way it is in the South. And you've got those guys, and he was what, Connecticut?
Yeah.
So he's coming from Connecticut. So the way they do things in Hartford, he comes down here, he's bringing with him what he knows.
Exactly.
And so yeah, I mean, you don't have, I mean, one of the interesting things, and this is my wife being, all about the big ceremonial type stuff, for her, it's fascinating that Mardi Gras in Mobile is older even than New Orleans, let alone Mardi Gras in New Orleans. It's older than even New Orleans itself.
Exactly.
So they have that heritage. And one of the other things that kind of went through my mind as you were talking, I'm thinking alternative history. What if the French had gone up a different river? What if they'd gone up this one instead of the Mobile River and established what became Mobile here? Yeah. That's another alternative idea that you could come out of that. And oh, by the way, that makes things easier then for the Spanish when they take it over, because it's closer to Pensacola. It's closer.
Oh, definitely.
So
definitely.
So it may have changed things dramatically. That's perhaps an alternative journey for another time. But yeah, there would have been a very different feel here. I mean, you've got a very colonial feel in Old Mobile.
Yeah.
That didn't exist here.
Yeah. Yes, this is a brand new place founded by people with different ideas a century later. So it is interesting to contemplate what might have been had that been allowed to continue. What sort of dynamics there would have been on these cross bay sister cities.
Well, what do you were talking about the scarcity of materials. Do you have a plat of the town site?
Well, I've got a plat of one of the extensions when it began to grow in the 1820s, and by all that I know, it probably was echoing what was already in place. So I've got some concept of what the streetscape would have looked like. We also have few parcels that, because of some archaeological projects, we managed to lay out on the landscape, and it's not complete, but it gives you some idea of where the major roads were and how to tie everything together. And what's amazing is that the road system in the park, in everything you look at, it echoes
No kidding.
1820s.
That's interesting.
I mean, we are following a lot of what was already here. So it does help you understand the layout of the place a little bit.
Well, I know the first time I came in here, I got lost as last year's Easter egg trying to figure out how to get around through here. So,
well, and some of that is because you're going, south, and then you turn.
Yeah, there's no direct.
The landmarks are all gone.
Right.
But had you been traveling and you went past the cemetery and you made it to a house and a courthouse, it would piece it together and it made more sense. So I think we're looking at the bones of a community, and we're still working to try to reconstruct why that road system works the way it does.
That's an interesting thought, and I mean you see that everywhere.
Yeah,
you see that everywhere. So, one last thing. I know you're probably getting close to time. We've been at it about an hour. So the courthouse.
Yeah.
How long I know you've got pictures over there that show the courthouse or I've seen them somewhere, even as there's a structure here, early 1900s. Not being used anymore, obviously. By that time, the county seat's been moved to Daphne and then in the middle of the night, to Bay Minette. But how long did the old building last?
Well, there are a few photos of people visiting the area, and the front wall of the courthouse is still there around 1900. I don't have many photos that help me understand exactly when that front wall collapsed, but the majority of the building had already apparently collapsed by then. So it's tough to say, but it looks as if once they pulled out in 1868, there was no maintenance, or there were people taking supplies, and then the thing was just disappearing.
Free bricks.
Yeah, free bricks. And my best guess is by 1910, 1920, you don't have anything standing that's visible. You got piles of bricks around there. That's just my guess, but when you put together the few accounts of people traveling through, nobody mentions a standing structure by that time. But they do, for example, even in the 1880s, I ran across a notice from Mobile of an excursion, steamboat excursion to visit Old Blakeley. It's like a picnic, like a daytime, come explore the ruins of this old place. So it was a tourist attraction for 100 years before it became a state park. So that's what I get out of that. But there's no mention of walking streets where there's a bunch of standing structures and the shells are there. I think most of that had been removed, pillaged, plundered, or fallen in. I think it went pretty quickly once people were not maintained.
That's not necessarily abnormal for structures, especially on the coast, dealing with the storms and all the things that you deal with.
Without treated wood.
Without treated wood. I mean, there's nothing to continue. I mean, all that would have held up would have been in the bricks and mortar, and once there was nothing supporting them, anything would have caused it to fall over. So, all right. So you are the director of the park.
Yep.
I'm going to ask you to get your crystal ball out now.
Okay.
What's the future?
Well, for the park?
For the park, for the Blakeley site in particular, and of course you're talking. You mentioned earlier you're already looking at the old cemetery, trying to identify where those graves are, those kinds of things. So what's the future?
We're going to continue to interpret what we have here, this incredible history, through a variety of ways. We've built some ghost structures. We'll probably build some more of those. There'll be additional tour options and programs focusing on this history. We are working towards building an interpretive center right now, so it'll be a new staff complex
Good.
and a place for events, but also have a museum of some scale. It won't be the Smithsonian, but we're going to have some place to display objects and talk about history and prepare you as you go out to explore the park. That's in the works. We're also adding, recreational amenities. In this area, we'll be adding some actually floating cabins, some houses on the water that you can rent. So it will bring a new dynamic to recreation here. We're going to improve our boardwalks, and there's a lot that's already going on the Old Town site. But over time, I could see us opening it up a little bit with a few more spots to walk and explore, a little bit better and more riverfront access that brings a little bit of new dynamic of people visiting the site. But at its heart, we're going to work to preserve anything that we can that we can identify, and we're going to work to interpret it in every way that we know how to keep it relevant to new audiences over time. So that's our mission, is to preserve and protect and promote and educate. And so we're going to continue to do that as we provide some of those recreational amenities that make a weekend stay versus just a daytime hike an option for people.
So for our listeners, I do want to make mention, we were supposed to have also had with us on this interview today eminent historian John Sledge, who is the resident historian at the National Maritime Museum of the Gulf in Mobile, but is also a very good friend of Blakeley Park. He does a lot of the Delta Explorer tours that you guys have.
He does tours for us and serves on the board of our foundation. Good friend.
Yeah. So, the point I'm making here, as people are listening to this interview later, and this is, I want to give you a venue to talk and kind of promote the things you're doing in the park here as well, because I think it's important that people understand what your vision is and where you're going with it, because what we're trying to do here, and the reason I tell these stories is to preserve them, because to your point, you have no written record, and there are precious few even official documents about what was going on here, but you have haven't found any diaries, haven't found any kind of letters or anything like that say, here's what life was like in Blakeley in 1825. So without preserving those stories, that disappears. And you could walk through this area right now, literally, if they hadn't dug up the foundation of the old courthouse and put a structure over it, if they hadn't put these ghost structures up here, you literally could walk through here now and never know that there was a bustling town here 200 years ago. So that's the kind of thing that by saving these stories this way. Tell me about what your vision is for the interpretive center that you're looking to build, and maybe what a timeline is on that.
We estimate, and when you're building anything big, the timelines go out the window quick, but I'm hoping that we're moving towards groundbreaking sometime in late 2027. That's what I hope.
Okay.
But it will be a facility where we've got to add some staff, so it'll be a place for staff. We need new offices. It will have a community heritage room of some sort. We're working with the Baldwin County Historical Society about becoming sort of the institutional home for that organization, which was founded here in Blakeley in the 1920s. Their first meeting took place here. And so that's a county-wide historical organization. And so in some way that we have not 100% identified everything, there will be some sort of community heritage center that's based with the County Historical Society's holdings that we incorporate into that. We'll have an event center where we can do a lot of the programming, lectures, and educational events, especially ones that we want to have take place even if it's raining, because right now we're very, very weather dependent. We'll have a place that we can still talk with people about the history and the heritage here. And the real highlight of the whole thing is that we're going to have a museum that will help you understand life at the Blakeley site from thousands of years ago to today. And it'll focus a lot, of course, on the Civil War story and the Blakeley story. We'll talk about indigenous residents going back to the woodland period 2,000 years ago. We'll talk a little bit about the Mississippian period. We'll talk about the Appalachian Indians who were here, the colonial settlers. And our goal with that museum is not to make it a standalone walk and see the entire story. What we want to do is use what we have with objects and with some creativity and images to help prepare you to fully appreciate the site. We want to integrate completely with your visit. So we don't want to be detached from it. We don't want you to go to the museum and feel like you know everything. We don't want you to go to the site and feel like you're missing something. We want to pair those two together in a creative way and use that as an introduction to a story that you really can best understand by exploring the landscape. That's our goal.
So to our listeners, one of the things I want to talk about here with what Mike just said, this is Blakeley State Park. It is called Historic Blakeley State Park, and it's called that for a reason, because you have literally, I'll say, over 1,000 years of history here. Prehistory, of course, because there wasn't any written record of that, but you're not very far. He mentioned Stockton earlier. It's not very far from Stockton where the Bottle Creek site is, where there are 18 mounds there that the Bottle Creek tribe constructed. We don't know what their name would have been. Are they the forerunners of the Creeks? I don't know that anybody really knows that. Or was it Creek Indians in their early days? I don't know that there's been any connection totally with that, or Muskogee more appropriately. But what we're looking at here is that this goes through the colonial period, through early American development into this area, from a Mississippi territory on into Alabama territory, on into state of Alabama, into Civil War, into all the way up into talking New Deal type stuff going on in the 1930s, where the area is being developed. I presume that there were some WPA and CCC kinds of things going on in the area, like there were in a lot of other areas.
Not on the park itself, because the park didn't become a park until the 1980s.
Right.
So, yeah.
But in this particular area per se, and of course Blakeley itself, it may not have been within the footprint of the park itself, but it would have been, I'd say, kind of spokes of a wheel coming out from it almost.
Exactly.
So there's, especially when you consider what Mike's already talked about, that the road system, the park's roads are the area roads. From that time period. So to that point, Mike, how, if somebody is interested, they've listened to this, they say, man, that's really cool, I would like to be a part of that, what do they need to do?
Go to blakeleypark.com. You'll find all of our rental facilities can be rented online. You'll find tickets to all of our boat cruises. You'll find a listing of all our events. And you also find a tab that is called Support Blakeley, that will give you some options if you're interested in becoming a friend of the park, which comes with some free admission benefits, and it comes with some recognition at different giving levels. We'll have a corporate sponsorship link. And if you just want to just straight out donate and say, that's a neat idea and a neat concept, but you're not able to get here, those options there as well. So that Support Blakeley tab will help you get connected in the long term with us in some way.
Okay. Anything else as we're, I think, winding down here? Anything else you'd like to add for our listeners to hear?
Well, I just appreciate your interest in the site, and those who are listening, I appreciate their interest in history. I'm a historian, and I just find the layers of history here fascinating. We can connect with literally every era of human habitation in this area, and in the Mobile Bay area, that's saying a lot. And we've got stories to tell, and we're doing it on a massive park, 2,000 acres. It's really undisturbed. You've got a lot of original wilderness, a lot of archaeological sites. You don't have a lot of the built environment, but what we're trying to do is strategically make that come alive in your mind's eye by reconstructing a few things and informing you what we're doing. We're not trying to, make it appear that it's a complete original structure, but we want to help you understand it. So we're working hard to keep all this history preserved and interpreted, and I just appreciate people who are interested in learning about that and sharing in that journey with us.
Well, let me jump in real quick here on something. We haven't talked much about the Civil War because that wasn't really within the scope of what we were doing here. But I will tell you, as someone who has traveled around a good bit, of course, I grew up in Tennessee, live in Tennessee, and I mean, the Civil War is everywhere there. These are some of the best preserved earthworks I have ever seen. I mean, they are very, very well preserved. So if you want to be able to walk through and see that kind of thing, and oh, by the way, if you've got some sort of LiDAR app where you can see exactly how those, I mean, you can follow it and it's still there.
We've got miles of them,
Yes.
of them.
So just know that all that is here. And Mike, thank you so very much for taking this time. I know you're a very, very busy man. And we mentioned that at the outset. So I know this was not really, I mean, this is one of those things that's, do you have time? No, I'll make time. You made time for this, and I appreciate
that. And yeah, I am busy, but this is what keeps me going, is this is the heart and soul of it, communicating what we have to people, so I'm always ready to make time to do that.
Okay. Well, very good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Hey, Big John here again, and I wanted to tell you that one of the things I love about podcasting is that it allows you to take me wherever life takes you. Whether you're driving to work, walking the beach, mowing the yard, sitting in an airport, or heading out on a road trip, Dauphin Island Diaries can go right along with you there. So if you enjoyed this episode, make sure you're following the podcast on your favorite platform. You'll find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, YouTube, and just about everywhere podcasts are available. And while you're there, I'd sure appreciate it if you consider leaving a rating or a review. It helps more people discover the stories of Dauphin Island and the Alabama Gulf Coast. And so, as always, thanks so much for listening.